Good Monday afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another Southern Oregon weather weekend update. One day late, and in fact a couple months late because I haven't put out an update in a while. But I'd like to review the precipitation and temperature departures from normal for the fall. Has it been a dry fall, a wet fall, or pretty close to average? Then we'll look at our December outlook, and I want to spend most of our time on the winter forecast, discussing our analogs, our climatology, and what I think the snow season is going to look like. So first here, over the last 2 months, you can see that the above normal precipitation has really been over the northern Pacific Northwest and the Rockies, and we've been pretty close to average, maybe a little on the dry side here, right on the Oregon-California border. But this actually is not a very uncommon pattern for a La Nina, where you have the heaviest precipitation over the Pacific Northwest and the northern Rockies, and then some into New England and the Ohio Valley as well. Here you can see the departure from normal temperatures, and the coldest air has been located over the Rockies and the northern plains. We've been a little bit above average as far as temperature goes, but really our fall has been pretty close to normal. The very rainy day that we saw just a week or two ago in November really helped put us much closer to average for precipitation, and temperatures haven't been too far away from normal as well. So let's talk about the pattern for December. We're going to be stuck in a kind of pattern called a Rex block for a while. These patterns can be stubborn and can take a while to break down. A Rex block is where you have an area of strong high pressure located to the north, and then underneath to the south you have an area of low pressure. And you can see it starting to set up here in days 1 through 5 on the GEFS ensemble. So once again, an ensemble is basically several dozen model runs all blended together to give an average picture, which hopefully is more accurate than any single model run. So here you can see we're pretty squarely under this strong ridge, this blob of orange. And if we roll this forward into the 6 to 10 day period, the picture hasn't really changed very much. Here's this Rex block with ridging to the north and troughing to the south. You see this big Aleutian low, and then the trough along the east coast. And lo and behold, by day 10 through 15, it finally starts to change a little bit, but at that point we're out in what is sometimes called fantasy land, where the models lose a lot of their predictive accuracy. So it's a pretty sure bet that for the next 2 weeks we're going to be pretty dry, and in the valleys that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be warm. Sometimes patterns like this can promote inversions in the valleys where you have a lot of cold air and fog that's trapped down below, and you have to venture into the mountains to get any real sun. I think fog could continue to be an issue, especially because we had light rain in Medford this morning. That just increases the relative humidity, and that's going to promote fog as well during the nighttime. It could be slow to burn off, but if you head into the hills at Roxy Ann Peak or up into the mountains, you'll get a break from some of those low clouds and fog. Up there it should be a little bit warmer than average because of this ridge over the next 2 weeks. So unfortunately that means our snowpack is not going to get off to a very good start. And let's talk about why. The MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation, which is just thunderstorms moving across the Indian Ocean, that's been moving through phases 1, 2, and 3 over the last couple weeks. So from Africa across the Indian Ocean toward Australia. But here you can see it's gone into the null phase, this circle, also sometimes called the circle of death. And that means it doesn't have a lot of an impact. And that's allowing other patterns to take over. And one of those that strongly influences the weather over our part of the country is the PNA, the Pacific North American Index. And when it's positive, like it's supposed to be over the next week or two, you can see it favors this Rex block type pattern that we talked about just a few minutes ago, where you have this area of high pressure that pretty much blocks incoming storms from Oregon and sends them into British Columbia. And then all the low pressure and storminess is along the east coast and into the southwest. So the PNA is running the show while the MJO is asleep. And here you go. You can see how similar that is to that positive PNA correlation that we would expect this time of year. So I wanted to spend some time on our winter forecast. And to start, I'd like to look at the sea surface temperatures. We're still seeing a La Nina type pattern, although it's weakened a little bit over the last week or two with colder than normal waters along the equator. Again, not as cold as they were a week or two ago, but still a pretty healthy La Nina. We also see a lot of warm water along the eastern seaboard, some cold water between Greenland and Europe, and then mostly warm water in the Pacific Ocean with a slightest suggestion of a negative PDO, this fringe of cooler water around the outside, and then mostly warm water in the Indian Ocean. Most of that warm water being directly to the west of Australia. So if we look at years that were very similar, and I have talked about these before, these analog years, three of the top analogs are 1995, 2011, and 2017. And one of the reasons these analogs are close is not only because the sea surface temperature pattern looks fairly similar, it's also because these are recent years. So sometimes you'll have forecasters taking analogs from the 1950s or 1960s, which there's some merit to that, but you also have to take into account the fact that the climate has changed quite a bit over the last 60 years, and also just the general state of the oceans and the atmosphere. So I'm inclined to favor more recent analogs, and the most recent analogs that have quite a few similarities to this year are these here, 1995, 2011, and 2017. And you can see the warm water in the Pacific, slightly cooler around the periphery, but still a lot of warm water along the eastern seaboard, the La Nina, obviously, and then the Indian Ocean dipole look where we have slightly warmer water near Hawaii and some cooler water to the west here in the western Indian Ocean. So what did those years look like? Well, lo and behold, December was very dry and pretty warm as well, much like our forecast from the computer models for the next couple of weeks. You can see the troughing to the south and then over the east coast as well. January was a little bit better. You can see this ridge being pushed to the south, and now a trough in the Gulf of Alaska, looking like it was able to push at least a few storms into our part of the country during those 3 years. Again, this is a blend of these 3 years, so some of them, like 2018, were drier, and some of them, like 2012, were wetter. But on average, we got this picture for January from these 3 years. It wasn't until February where things really started to turn around. And this was not a particularly, doesn't look like it was a particularly wet month on average. But this is a pretty kind of dry and cold pattern where you have cold air coming over the top of this ridge. Storms not able to pick up a lot of moisture probably as they drop down into the northern Rockies and maybe squeezed over far enough west to give some snow along the west coast as well. March in all three of these years was pretty stormy. So the general picture is that winter starts out slow according to our analogs, and that we don't really see any significant snowfall until the third week of January. So what are we looking at here? We are looking at the snow water equivalent, so the water content in the snowpack in the Rogue and Umpqua basins for the 3 years that I highlighted. Here's 2021, that's the current year. This is our little black squiggly line that only goes part way. This bright green line is average snow water equivalent. And then the other 3 lines are 2018, 2012, and then 1996. And you can see all of them start out with a little bit of snow and then pretty much flatline until January 17th. And it's almost by magic that it's kind of incredible how all these line up. On January 17th, all of a sudden it starts to snow. And in the case of 20, let's see, what is this year? This is 1996. In the case of 1996, it starts to snow a lot. But 2011, 2012 also has a really nice recovery. 2017, 2018 never really gets close to average. So I think that's kind of what our worst case scenario snowpack situation would be for this winter, is 2017, 2018. Unfortunately, one of the similarities we do have with 2017, 2018 is the bad fire season. If you recall, that year had very bad fires in California, in Sonoma and Napa. And of course, this year we had devastating fires all up and down the West Coast. And we had some easterly wind events there in the fall, and we also had some easterly winds during the winter that obviously were not as strong, but easterly breezes that kept things cold but dry. So that really kept a lot of moisture from coming this far south. Most of the systems kind of went over the top and into the northern Rockies. But a slow start followed by some recovery. Also, in any forecast, we have to take into account what's happened recently, regardless of whether those years are perfect matches for the sea surface temperature pattern or not, and that's called climatology. So if we look at all of the recent years, the last 3 years, they all had a pretty slow start until the middle of January, regardless of whether it was El Nino or La Nina. So that's just kind of the way the atmosphere is feeling right now, and there's no indication that it's going to change drastically and that we're going to get some crazy start right out of the gate like 2016-17, which frankly I think is the La Nina that a lot of people are hoping for if you like snow. But the indications are it's not going to be one of those kind. It's going to be one of these drier kinds that I showed you. So, to conclude, for December we're expecting a dry start. And that doesn't necessarily mean warm. I think inversions are going to keep the valleys cold and foggy, but the mountains might be sunny and warmer than normal. The earliest possible time for a pattern change would be around mid-month or later at the earliest. Our winter analogs on the whole show a pretty slow start to winter with not really any significant snow for the mountains until the second or third week of January. Hopefully I'm wrong on that point. I really do hope I'm wrong. But climatology, so our recent years, regardless of sea surface temperatures, also had a slow start. So that's just the current regime we're in. We do have a suggestion that late in the winter there could be a little bit more snow heading into February and March. So that could bring us closer to average if snowpacks aren't doing very well in January. So thanks so much for listening, and don't forget to set your notifications for the next weekend update. I'll try to post a little more regularly, maybe do a discussion of different types of La Ninas and when the La Nina pattern really matters for our area of the country, and when it's not so significant. So please leave a like if you enjoyed the forecast, and I'll see you next time.